We'll call the meeting to order. There to be here in a second too. So first, I'd like to begin the acknowledging that we're here in the big mountain ancestral and long deceded territory of the people. So the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Mover, please.
So moved.
Darla, second for Randy. One in favor, say aye. It's approved. Okay, we have a plan presentation reduction on the land use bylaw process. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to everybody present here. I'd like to introduce Ian and Ryan Upland. We're really pleased to have you here tonight. Thank you for being here. Thank you for accommodating the later start time. There were years where Upland was a successful bidder in our land use planning RFP tendering process. So tonight's meeting is to have some introductions and to talk about how we're going to walk through this process over the next year and a half, 2 years or so. So I'll start off with some introductions. First, the staff here, myself, we have a deputy treasurer in the Northeast, our CAO in the North, and our director of corporate services, Swan. And then behind me, we have Adam and Shelley, their communications and their systems. We also have one of our councillors here this evening along the west side of the room. We have Larry Turner, Debbie Wadden, Mary Elliott, Randy Palmer, our deputy warden, Wayne Murray, Warden Robert Parker, Charlie McKeel, John Butler, Joe Boyles, Chester Dewar, and E.P. Johnson. So thank you for being here tonight. And Upland, we were very happy with receiving the bid from Upland. It checked all of our boxes. We were very happy with the proposal, happy with the price. They were the winning bid based on the rubric and have been doing, as mentioned in other meetings, considerable work in nearby and neighboring similar municipalities throughout the province. And we do believe that they'll do an excellent job for us with this project and look forward to the excellent we're going to have 2 years with them. So with that said, thank you very much. I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Logan, and regrets coming from Councilor Dave Parker. You had the commitment tonight, so we couldn't make it. So also start your presentation. You want to what's questions during the presentation or rather wait till
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and yeah, I guess, well, if anybody has burning questions through, we'll keep it pretty casual. So if anybody does have burning questions through the presentation, I think just chime in and we can address them as they come, or and we'll definitely take time at the end otherwise. Yeah, thank you, Logan, and we're really excited to be here tonight and to work with you. I guess this is the start of a almost 2-year relationship, so that's pretty exciting. I've spent many summers in Victor County. I worked at Camp Getty for many years. I went there as a kid, so it's nice to be back. So maybe you got that on the slide there. Sort of background there. Sorry. Yeah, so I'm Ian Watson. I'm Upland senior planner. Worked many years in municipal planning on the public side, and then joined Upland, and now I get to do it for municipalities all over Atlantic Canada, Newfoundland, Brunswick, a little bit of PEI, and of course Nova Scotia. On this project, I'm joined by Paul Detz, municipal planner, Ryan McLean, our manager of engagement, and Garrett Wiley, who's our GIS mapping technician, and we have a recent hire at Upland, Lydia Broderick, who's helping Ryan out on the engagement front. So you'll get to meet Lydia as well over the course of the next year and a half, 2 years. We are based out of Dartmouth, but as I said, I don't know if we're based out of Halifax. We moved this week. As of today, we're based out of Halifax. But we work all over Atlantic Canada in communities, big and small, and including your neighbors, Cumberland and Colchester right now. It's a great way to see the province. Slide there. So I'm going to give a little introduction. This is a unique project for us in the sense that your municipality, other than wind turbines, are starting from complete scratch in regards to planning. Lots of municipalities that we work with are unplanned for a large portion of them, but have some planning. So I'm just going to give a little background on what planning is and why we do it and what this project's all about. So planning is a collaborative process. It's used to basically set a plan for how we want our community to develop in the future, and set out the policies and regulations for development to help us achieve that future. Slide. So the Pictou County Plan Project, and we'll come up with a snappy name for it at some point over the next couple of weeks. Is at the end of the day, the goal is to develop new municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw. And plus, I think part of this too is on kind of the process and procedure side as helping you as a municipality build up the capacity to implement these documents. Fundamentally, this is now a requirement in Nova Scotia with Bill 58, which sets mandatory planning requirements for all lands in the province to be planned. And along with that, a set of minimum planning regulations, standards that plans have to meet. I will say those standards are fairly wide open and fairly light. They require that you have statements of policy on things like housing and industrial land and institutional uses and all of those sorts of things. But there's very little that tells you what those statements of policy have to be. Really, you do get to build a plan that suits your community and meets the needs of your community. Also, Nova Scotia is changing. We've seen record data migration in the past couple of years. We're dealing with climate change. There's all sorts of issues on the horizon that part of the value of planning is thinking about how those are going to affect us and figuring out how we want to respond. Slide. This is a quote I put up regularly at these things, that if you don't know where you're going, you might end up someplace else. And that's kind of the fundamental of what we're trying to get at. Time doesn't stop. Our communities move forward, whether or not we have a plan or not, and we can choose to have a hand in how that evolves, or we can let it happen to us. So a big part of that is taking that choice and guiding our communities the way we want to. More specifically, some of the reasons we do this is to support our community's character, culture, and identity. Identify those aspects that make Pictou County, instead of somewhere else, and reflect those in our plan for the future. Slide. As I mentioned, change, preparing for change. Of course, climate change is the big one. Making sure that we're building our developments in ways that are mindful of that, but also there's changes like economic change, or a big one in Atlantic Canada has always been demographic change. How do you change? How do you plan for an aging population historically, and now a growing population? Also, a big part of planning is thinking about the natural environment and how that relates to development. Identifying those areas that are sensitive and protecting them from development, and at the same time identifying those environments that might be risky. Where if we develop there's going to be problems, and avoiding them. Land use planning is also thinking a lot about resource development, agriculture, forestry, fisheries, mining. Those are all really big parts of communities, but particularly rural communities in Atlantic Canada and Nova Scotia. And often they support that character and culture piece, but they take up large areas of land and they have operational needs, whether it's noise or spreading manure on the field or whatever it is that have potential impacts. And we want to make sure there's space in our communities where those can happen and not have people complaining about it and potentially causing challenges for these businesses that are part of our communities. Slide. I should say some of these pictures are from other municipalities. We haven't had a chance to do a picture taking tour to take their pictures, and these will be replaced by the time we speak with the public. Those ones in particular from Yarmouth, but one of the reasons we planned is to think about infrastructure and how to use it efficiently. Roads, sewer and water, where we have sewer and water, sidewalks. They're important services that municipalities provide, but they're also expensive and they require upkeep. So we want to be thoughtful about where we put those things and then how we use them once we have them. Slide. This is kind of the, part of just the roots of planning, I guess, in North America is the idea of separating the incompatible land uses. There was a time where you had a factory town and you had your house, and the factory was blocked over and you walked over to it and that was all fine and good, but people's expectations change, and that's not necessarily what people don't necessarily want to live right next to the factory, even though we all benefit from it, either through employment or the things that puts out. Same with chicken gardens, they're essential, but you don't necessarily want one in your backyard. So thinking about how do we have a place for everything, everything's in its place. On the other hand, obviously this hasn't been an issue in Pictou County to date with not having planning, but a lot of what the discourse or the talk is in our world is like maybe we went too far with that idea of place for everything, where we got really rigid and said, drew lines in the sand, and now it's illegal in a lot of communities to build that Main Street style development that you see in the picture on the left, where you can't have a community where you can walk a block to get a jug of milk because it's illegal to have that store there. So a lot of the thinking in the planning world these days is like, how do we take a step back and say, let's just let things happen. Slide. So in terms of how this all happens, and this is probably as technical as we'll get tonight, but in Nova Scotia, and you're very likely very familiar with this, is we have our toolbox of municipalities, which is Municipal Government Act. And it sets out, of course, all the various aspects that a municipality does in terms of taxation and all that, but it also has a whole section on planning and subdivision. And it also has statements of provincial interest. These are really high levels. There's 5 of them, 6 of them, but 5 that apply outside of HRM. That all plans have to meet on housing, agricultural lands, drinking water, infrastructure, and flood understanding. Yes, thank you. So plans have to be consistent with those, but again, fairly high level and fairly broad. And then now that MGA, the Municipal Government Act, now has those minimum planning requirements in. Out of this toolbox, we kind of build our blueprint for the community, and that's the municipal planning strategy. That's the high level vision, the goals, the context also. It kind of includes some of that information about how do we make those decisions? Why did we make these decisions about the future of our community, so that you as council, so that residents, potential business operators in the future can look back and say, oh, okay, this is the way things are and why. And so that has the high level policies. And we take that blueprint and we build the nuts and bolts of our community, which is the land use bylaw, it's the regulations, the zoning. And these are the rules that anyone who's building a house or a subdivision or the building aspect of the subdivision or a new business. This is the document they look at to say, yeah, I can do that or no, you can't. And then it's what the municipal development officer uses to issue a permit. And the key thing is the bylaw has to agree with the plan has to agree with the act. Slide. So the way that might play out is that the MGA, well, it does have a statement that municipal planning strategy must contain statements of policy with respect to housing. And then you tailor that to what your community needs. So in the plan, you might say something, this is just hypothetical, the municipality of County Pictou values and wants to encourage diversity of housing options. And then you would take that policy statement and the land use bylaw and actually carry that out by making sure there's lots of options for different types of housing. That's again, just an illustration Now, going to that toolbox, you can't use tools you don't have. So the MGA, Municipal Government Act, sets out a bunch of things we can regulate. And that's a can, we don't have to. And I want to emphasize this, that, you know, these are tools we have, we don't have to use them. And that's really going to come to what's appropriate for your community. You know, as we go out and we talk to people and hear what matters to people, and what people's needs are, I mean, you know, through this process, meet with you as a council and in what these documents should be, we may not use some of these tools because they're just not needed or appropriate to the context. But we can regulate, you know, common things are lot standards, like how big lots have to be, building placement on the lots, building size. Very common one is the uses permitted on land, it's called land use bylaw after all. So that's things like where it's appropriate to have housing versus where it's appropriate to have offices versus meat packing plants. Setting that into the documents. But you can go further than that, you can regulate signage, servicing, processes, that's probably going to be in there. Things like outdoor storage, parking requirements, topsoil removal. And you can prohibit development in areas of environmental sensitivity. Hazards are present. Those are the one of the few cases where you can prohibit development. So those are some of the options we have. There are also a couple things when you go to that toolbox tools we don't have. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list, the list is endless, but these are the ones that come up a lot when we talk to people out in community meetings and things. We do not, through planning, regulate resource activities. So that's the actual act of farming, fishing, mining, or forestry. We don't regulate cutting trees or the crops that you put in the ground. Through these plans, we can, if we choose to, regulate the things related to them. So the easiest example is forestry. We don't regulate forestry practices, but we can regulate where it's appropriate to have some. Or another example, fishing. We don't regulate the fishery, but we can regulate where it's appropriate to have a fish processing plant. We don't regulate lands below the ordinary high water mark. So then you're getting into provincial territory, or federal. So that comes up a lot in relation to things like aquaculture. We don't regulate water-based aquaculture or what happens on beaches necessarily. We don't regulate the people. That's a really key thing. You know, we regulate buildings and what goes on in them, but not who occupies, and not who's allowed to do development or not. You know, we don't regulate where people are. You know, you can only do this if you're local or versus away, or if you're old or young or any of that. No. And the other one that kind of comes up a lot is motor vehicles, both in relation to like speed limits. You know, often in relation to development, you hear a lot about like, oh, it's going to have fast cars coming down the road. We don't, you know, we want speed limits. Well, we don't do that through this. But also in terms of things like, it gets a little fuzzy with RVs, for example. You know, when's an RV a building and when's it a vehicle? It's a little fuzzy. Fine. And so, you know, ultimately, at the end of the day, the goal is to have a plan and a bylaw that reflects your community, not some other community in Nova Scotia or the rest of Canada or whatever, Atlantic Canada. You know, it's about having a Pictou County plan. And so to do that, you know, at the end of the day, planners, and we know how to write these documents, you know, we'll already know this municipality to some degree, and we'll get to know it better. But at the end of the day, this document belongs to you as a council, to your staff, residents, community groups and organization, and businesses that are here. So at the end of the day, this is a project that has to involve all of you to come up with a document that reflects what you need. And of course, also the province has an interest in all of this as the holder of the toolbox. And also the person the group that signs off on these plans. One other thing that I did want to touch on too is that, and this is really key because it often feeders in the community, that whenever we do planning, The Municipal Government Act has this concept of non-conforming structures and uses. So you might hear the term grandfathering. The MGA has that kind of enshrined in it, that anything that was legally developed prior to the rules changing has protections. If you built that house and we put in new rules that now say you have to be 20 feet back from the property line, and that house is only 10 feet back, we're not coming along and tearing it down. We're not saying you gotta move back. It's good. You built in good faith, it's cool. Same thing for uses, like if zoning comes in and says, no, this is a residential area, but you have your mechanics garage that's been there for 20 years. The rules don't come and shut you down. There are provisions that there's a grace period. So if you have that garage and keep operating it, great. If you close down, there's a time period that you can be closed down and still be open as a garage. But if you close down for a long time period, then there's an expectation, okay, we're going to evolve to conform to the zone. We can relax those provisions. We can set a time period that makes sense for the community. Through our documents, the MGA gives a minimum of 6 months, but you can make that longer. And so in this case, where there's no existing planning, everything was legally developed, presumably. Should broad statements like that, but I can't think of a situation where, at least from a planning perspective, they would have been. So these will be rules for stuff going forward. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the big things that was coming up where the neighborhood issue, thing is to talk about fences. Like, okay, if person is fenced up, years and years and years, there's a possibility now they can come and say, you got to move that fence, you got to get the other. Is that anything to that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. No, so yeah, that fence was there prior. And we don't have to put in rules about fences, but if we do, that wouldn't be retroactive. It wouldn't be going back and saying, well, that fence has been there for 20 years, but it's done for 100 years. It doesn't meet the rules anymore. You got to tear that out. Sometimes there's a bit of concern that, people, it does put the onus a little bit on the property owner. Like if someone complained about a fence and we, the municipality said, oh, was that fence been there? We want to see some proof. And I should say that's from a planning perspective. That's not to say that, for example, the municipal engineer may have the authority to remove a fence that's a traffic hazard or something like that. But from us setting rules, general rules for the whole municipality for development, we don't go back and enforce that. Thank you. Questions before I keep going? Okay. So, as we mentioned, this project's going to be, we're tentatively planning for kind of about 20 months. Though we were just talking of a council election right at the end of that, so we'll have to figure that out, how we want to time that. But for now, we're talking 20 months, and we're in this kind of 5 broad phases. The first being project initiation. That's over this month in May. This is getting our feet under ourselves. Meetings. We have startup call staff. We'll be here too. We'll be doing a tour of the whole municipality, taking pictures, looking at. As I mentioned, been here lots of times, but looking at it with the eyes of the planner, making sure we have lots of nice pictures, that kind of thing. And then we get into the study and analysis piece of it, which will be kind of over the spring and into the first bit of the summer, in July. And in this phase, it's kind of a lot of background work on our end, inventory land uses. So we know what's here today, looking at landscape, demographics, understanding from a planning perspective, from a data-driven perspective, what is Pictou County? What does Pictou County look like today? And the end result of that is a report that's public, that's kind of acts as a source of information and background for our talks and engagement process. So when people say, oh, Pictou County feels like it's been growing, we can have this resource where we can say, yeah, look, it's growing by this much or whatever it is. Then we go into the exciting part, which we love to do, which is the formative engagement. And we're gonna have a bit of time tonight to talk about what that's gonna look like. But that's over the summer, basically, and then into the fall. And that's going out to communities, and talking about what matters to you. What, what do you care about? How do you want to see this municipality evolve in the future? How do you want to see things not change, or all those different aspects that eventually will make their way into the document. Then over the kind of winter of 2023, 2024, we'll work on draft documents. We'll be back here with you, going through them, seeing what we got right, what we got wrong, adjusting them as we need to, and then kind of in the middle of next year, doing another round of public engagement, reviewing those documents, looking at the nuts and bolts, talking to people about how that will affect their land potentially, and again, making adjustments as we need to. And then once we're at a place where we're happy, as a collective, then we go into a formal adoption process. And eventually they get sent off to go into effect. That's kind of what the next 20 months will look like. Right, here's a little more detail. It didn't come out on the screen. It's weird. It's been a real weird. They were blurry on my screen. Anyways, so I don't know if I need to repeat it because I just summarized them. But yeah. So that is kind of the high level of what this is all about and what we're expecting to do over the next little while. Before we move on to the engagement piece of things, I guess certainly happy to take any questions or about planning, about the project specifically, about what we can expect over the next 2-ish years.
Thanks very much for your presentation. It was very good, and I think it's what we're looking for, engagement with the people and ourselves, make sure it's done right the first time. So, questions for Gordon is the first one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for coming tonight. And if the first step down the 20 months, with most things end up taking longer than the papers that might be, may have to cross over the election. I guess one thing myself and others have mentioned here several times since this became mandatory is the history of planning. And it's not good. I mean, it's not good at all. You would hope that maybe, I don't think there's anybody sitting around this table other than Karen, who was around when that happened. But it was one of the most explosive things I've ever seen happen in this county. Planning has been a hated word here ever since. And that's been passed down from generation to generation. People are ready for what they're going to do to a system. So not to put a negative light on it, because I know in some areas of our county, we need some type of protection for people and their properties. A real good property can be destroyed by some activity moving right in next to it. There's nothing they can do. We went through one of those now in front of me. After nobody wanted planning, then suddenly they wanted planning, but just for a little area for a little time. But I think we need to be very, very careful, or else when you go to the public engagements, you'll already be on the defensive. Because this is the things I've heard that you're going to do to us, just like Council Rose brought up, go to the chicken fence. It doesn't take much, especially with today's online. We're good for families who would have it online. But I think it's something you have to be very aware of. It's the history of planning in this county. I would investigate that completely, so you know what went wrong and what happened, because it was particularly in the farmland areas, and it was particularly around. Because one issue it centered around was, you're going to tell me that my son or daughter can't build a house up that far in the pasture? That is what lit the fire. So it ended up with the county withdrawing from the planning commission, and ended up with a lot of people losing their jobs, and there's a lot of hurt connections to plastic from all along. So that's the big message I want to get across tonight. And My brother Dave would be here, would be expressing it stronger than me if he were here. But I was talking to some people in East Hants, and they're under the same directive as we are. And they got themselves into a lot of trouble. I don't know if you folks worked with them or somebody else. But they eventually had to withdraw what they were planning on doing, because there was so much, opposition to it. And we don't want to go down that path for sure. I'm not sure of the details of it, but again, I think it had something to do with farmland and rural areas. It's so easy to get down the wrong path here and for rumors to get started. And then what we really need won't happen because of that. And you'll have a lot of disharmony in our communities, I guess. So there's a lot of potential here for things to go wrong. So we really have to step carefully and look at what others have done and done wrong in some cases. Because it will happen here if there's any chance of it happening, just because of the history. People have been warned to watch for. I hear the planners are in town. Be careful. We were told at the first when this was first announced to us that this is minimal plan. So it meant that we could plan in those more dense areas, call them suburban or call them villages and communities or whatever. But that we can basically leave alone our more rural areas. And I think that's where we need to land somewhere. Yes, we need some protection. If you own a piece of land in West Branch, you don't want a sawmill to just sit down beside you and run all night. Those things can still happen no matter how rural we are. So we need some protection. We need a lot of different rules for the more rural areas. Probably 75% of our county that we're responsible for is in that more rural with the odd dense community here and there. But we really have to be awfully careful. I think that we don't try to apply the same rules across the board. They have to be different, and we have to be very careful how that goes out, because if it gets out wrong, I don't think we'll ever get it back. We'll ever get it back under control. I'll leave it at that for now, Mr. Chair. I have some other specific questions, but I can ask them.
Okay, just more Councilor Boyles.
Yeah, I just, one more question that I don't want to be asked, but I just trying to get, when it comes to chickens, like, I have chickens in different areas of that. I mean, this is a 4-H, big 4-H community, Victor County, and I just wondered, is there going to be, are you looking at anything like that to try to say, okay, guys, you live in a certain part in the county, you can't have chickens or raise chickens, or will it be a number on them, how many you can raise, stuff like that? That's people's very big concern, right?
That's me, Mr. Chair, Councillor. That's ultimately up to the community. Like, if it's important that everybody be able to have as many chickens as they want. I think this goes to your comment, Gordon, that, that needs to reflect the context, and that's what people want, right? If people are concerned, and this can be, we can differentiate. We can say, oh, geez, in the middle of a denser community, maybe we want some reasonable restrictions on them versus the rural areas where you can fill your roofs. That's ultimately we can do that. Whatever works for people, I think. So, thank you.
Speaker, Councilor Keel.
Thank you very much, Deputy Warden. Thank you for presentation. I guess I'm one of those that built in the corner of the pasture, and I think my parents are too, and their parents before them and all that. So it's very important to me, our density and cultural side of things, and now being very fishing family, that we make sure that we definitely protect our roots and protect our lands. And that's freedom that comes with that. I just have a few questions, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Chair. That saying that all lands in the province has to be planned, that kind of grasped and kind of, thank you for including that, that kind of made, very good sense to me, and also kind of laid the groundwork for, I guess, of where I'm going here with everything. You had mentioned that the restrictions or the recommendations coming from the province were quite broad. So ultimately, we have to submit our plan to the province and they will approve or not approve. I'm assuming, is it approval? Is that we're seeking, or what is the exact? How does that go?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So yeah, at the end of this month's council has adopted a plan that they're happy with. That gets submitted to municipal affairs, and municipal affairs staff review it against the statements of provincial interest, the ones on agricultural lands, housing, infrastructure, floodplains, and drinking water, and also now against these minimum planning standards. And then they make a recommendation to the minister to either just say yes, sign off on them, or to do a deeper dive. So in some cases, the minister can come back and require changes, or they just sign off on and approve it. It's rare, and I would be very hesitant to write a plan that would push the limits of life. We have a fair bit of experience with this and know what's going to apply with it, but not, like I say, it's fairly broad. For example, the statement on agricultural land says the plan needs to identify agricultural land. It's based on soils, which has its problems, but you need to identify them, and you need to put reasonable protections reasonable to the context. And so
That's pretty broad.
that's pretty broad.
Yeah.
In Kings County, that means you can't build a home in the corner of the block because it's the prime breadbasket of Nova Scotia, and that threshold is high in that context. In other areas of the province, is it really that necessary to be having it? No. And so you just need to justify that in our context, county context, what is risk. And that's the same for everything. The one that's probably strictest is floodplain areas. Like, don't allow to know floodplain.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. There's very, very real safety issues with it.
Yeah.
But everything else is really, the other thing you have to do is treat residential facilities same as any other housing. So things like nursing homes, group care homes, all those things, you can't say no. It's really, you need to have statements about housing, you need to have statements about industry, you need to have statements about commercial use, but they just need to be particular to your context.
Okay, so what we're trying to create here, curate is a very Pictou County unique to us. It's not cookie cutter through other areas of the province. Is that the word? Yeah, I agree with what Gordon said about a lot of our area is rural, and we should, I guess, the feeling, and I share this feeling, and it's kind of our land, and we should be able to do so with what we own the land, should be able to do so as we see fit. However, we should also be able to have protections and that sort of thing as well. So I think it's a very fine line that we're dancing. And I think that most people walk that fine line, that they see that they want those freedoms and they want the ability to do with their land as they see fit. But they also can see that they should probably have a few protections in there just in case. But for the most part, I would say that would be generally honest for everybody. And I guess the last point I would like to make, I kind of have mixed feelings about summertime meetings. Either people are away or like in my area, we're influxed with people. It depends. If you're in cottage country or where you're at. So I'm kind of hesitant in summer meetings. I don't know. I'd be swayed either way, I think, but it's something to think about. I think that's all the questions I have for you.
Thanks, Sarah. Else, no, more, that's more, Andy, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I think this is a much needed exercise in our community. State planning is a bad word, but somebody for example, that everybody knows around this table, look at this story. Somebody moves into your community and sets up a junkyard right across the road from $1 million property. Is that right? To any property. And right next door to this junkyard is a beautiful couple that lived in this community, and it's a rural area. This is not urban, this is a very rural area. And there's the point where they write me letters saying, I have to move, being forced out. And so it's much needed, and 2/3 of our population in our municipality lives within 10 kilometers of an urban center. Like, we have a lot of rural areas, and mine is very suburban, very rural. But they both get impacted by non-conforming activities that there's no safeguards. And unfortunately, everybody in the community has to drive by this place every day. So we have to be mindful of the way we have it set up now. So, I mean, if farming in my community, forestry in my community, they'll be protected. We can figure this out. We're all grown-ups here. We should be able to figure this out. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone else? Not Robert. Sticker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Particularly concerned, because we just had a meeting the other day on this, Logan knows what I'm talking about, on our shorefront areas. So problems tend to develop when people get more densely packed in an area. If you're in West Branch or downtown or Lismore, Glen Erie, the neighbors are up over the hill away, they don't bother each other too much. But when you start squeezing people in, and especially with climate change, and how much that's affecting our shore areas, when we talked about it the other day, was this homeowner or cottage owner, we said we would bring it up here tonight to see where it might sit, because it's rural in a way for sure, but people are packed in there, and people are building $1 million homes, cottages, with a lot of money invested. And I've dealt with half a dozen of them probably over the last year or two, where there doesn't seem to be any clarity in the provincial law. But one of the big issues is rock on the shore, which protects that person's property, but does a lot of harm to the neighboring properties who perhaps can't afford the rock. They might be people that have been there since day one. But that's just one particular issue. In other case, it has to do with access roads. And all kinds of issues. I remember one was something they were gonna, build $1 million home on a little jump of an island or something between Maine, where the most of the cottages were, and the water. There's constant arguments over the water, the high water mark. So the government's coming out, I know, with new legislation here that they're still working on the regulations for. But it appears that whether there was enough, protesting by certain groups or whatever, but it appears like the rocking may not. Just rumored that it was going to be come out as part of, where you could build, how close to the water, how high up. But it appears the rocking may be now left out of that, so it's left with people come to us. We don't have right now any authority, and I don't know if we would under planning have any authority on something like that. So I see you shaking your head no, so that has to be provincial, then, is it?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, that's just what to hear that may be coming out, because that does come up a lot, and the Coastal Protection Act regulations, we're kind of thinking that they were going to deal with that. But yeah, that it would be a provincial that goes to that, the high water mark piece.
And then the other ones are more, if they're not to do with the high water piece, they're just access to land. Access, there was one in Councilor McKeel's area last year, about access to beaches. somebody new buys property and, traditional, they use it over here, and now everybody's blocked out. Is that the type of thing that we have any control?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes and no. We hear that one very frequently. Yeah, we see that in traditional shoreline access. I've been using that since dawn of time, and now you're gonna close it off. So not directly, but often what we do in plans, you know, our best tool for that is we can put provisions in that, like when a subdivision happens along the coast, usually like through the subdivision provisions, municipalities can obtain public lands. And, you know, one of the things you can use that is when subdivision happens along the coast, using that to gain public rights of way. Access points basically to coast, and you know, that's reactive in a way, it only works in situations where subdivision is happening. But it is one little tool that we can use through planning to help support the issues that communities face.
Thank you. There's going to be more problems, I think, along the waterway, because everybody, our big construction, and you look at it every month, is in the areas that touch on the water, whether it be District 2 or 3 or 4, or maybe a couple of the ones touch on the water to a lesser degree, but that's where the majority of our building is taking place. But you only cram so many, you know, people from outside buying up large parcels, and all of a sudden that close belongs to them now, doesn't belong to the rest of us anymore. So I don't know if this is going to help us solve that any, but it doesn't sound like it maybe. But another one that we run into you mentioned RVs. So, you know, housing is a big issue right now. So there's just no place for some people to live, or they can't afford to build a house or rent's $1,500 a month or more. So you see more and more of RVs being parked, and you know, some skirting around the side of them, and you know, it came up here one time, I think almost. Well, yeah, there was one issue in District 4, I think is what brought it up, but there was other smaller issues, some in my district and others. Yeah, you feel for these people because they got no other place to live. And, you know, we work out to put people in their houses, but we're to protect the other people to have a nice house they built, inherit it, and what it does to their property. So, you know, not saying we want to do this, but is it doable?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so RVs are one of those topics. I fully expect it will come up. It's experience elsewhere says anything. It's probably going to be one of the stickiest topics we'll be talking about this 2 years from now. Still, because they're one of the. So Brian's been doing a lot of work, you know, to help people deal with the fear of planning and stuff. Brian's been, for example, the Colchester work. One of the things is like asking people, you know, what are some examples in your community of why you might want to have planning? And the one that comes up a lot is RV parks. You know, it's a trigger point for a lot of people to say, well, we might want to have some thought about rules, but they're also one of those, they're very valid. You know, lots of people, it's recreationally and then also for housing purposes more and more. It's a big thing that's happening. So it's gonna come up, it's gonna be sticky. We can put some rules around it if that's what is appropriate to the community. It gets a little fuzzy because they skirt that line between vehicles and buildings. So writing good, clear rules that are easy to enforce is going to be challenging. But if that is a tool that's needed for this community, it is something we can put our head towards.
And thank you. I would never want to be in a position to tell somebody they have to move, but they got no other place to go and have to move over there. I don't think the council wants to go there, but does there have to be some kind of rules around, you know, appearance or functionality or whatnot? I only have one left here, and I just wondered about the tool landscape. I've been in the horticultural business for a long while. I wondered what that tool meant. You know, you may want to use that tool. How do you use the tool landscape?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So usually it's in relation to development. you know, it's a tool that's probably not appropriate in a lot of contexts, particularly rural contexts. But we can control things like lot coverage, so, you know, on a high level, how much of your lot is covered by buildings? And that's not so much landscaping as it is making sure that you're not paving too much and you don't have stormwater problems. If you want to get really detailed, you can put in rules about how many trees have to be planted when someone builds a new building. And you know, and that might be, you often see that in relation to like multi-unit buildings. If you're gonna build this multi-unit building, you have to have landscaping front or whatever it is. You can tailor it to the needs, but it's in relation to development. Like, it's not setting a general landscaping standard for the municipality or anything. It's like when you're building this type of building, this is the type of landscaping or something like that. But again, that's only, you know, you'd only use that tool in context where it really.
And I just thought it was dangerous, perhaps, if we start telling people, you know, you gotta keep that lawn over down to the sites and you gotta plant so many trees and you're really getting into trouble. Thank you, Mr. Yes.
Thank you, Robert. We'll have one more counselor. Do you want to keep to the end, or do you have a comment on what we've talked?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Just related to what Parker was mentioning. When I really talked about the meeting last week with our resident related to coastal protection, I think that it's not much of the not within the municipal jurisdiction. So as a point would be look at options to incentivize using natural coastal protection features, similar to how we incentivize the PACE program. You're not how we're going to be doing that. So those are things that could be explored through several policies further with this and possibly complementary to it. The point about access to beaches and other properties and via parkland transfer, most municipalities with this exercise have, say, a 5% parkland transfer cash and lieu program. So similarly, there could be incentivizations within our policy to look at having public access to and RV parks as well. Everybody's familiar with the debate around short-term rental there. You can think that in Manhattan County had another example to this, where people using short-term rentals and presenting it as though we're a residential usage, but really it's a commercial enterprise, and there's some restrictions around that. So those are just some areas in direct relation to things that we're talking about that we have some control over, and that either does or doesn't need to make it on the curriculum that we're policy.
Thanks, Logan. Mr. Dover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I said about minimal planning. If we agreed to do some planning, more planning, we don't need planning. We have, I guess you said about the wind power. If we decided to put that in subdivisions and anywhere that there was water and sewer, that covers totally. We could get into this with the problems.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so you have to have planning everywhere. So that does mean there needs to be some kind of rural zoning, but that rural zoning can be fairly loose if that's what the community needs. You know, we could have we were talking about Pictou Island on the way up, that, you know, Pictou Island, we many to Pictou Island zone. It's just like, okay, do you what you get there? You know, you know, and that's it can be quite if we need it to be that.
Well, I'm just trying to do it in such a way that it's going to save an awful lot of grief, okay? And my area, I have water and sewer, Riverton and Freakin, Hopeful. I got thousands of acres. Anyway, and maybe one of the top 5 landowners in Nova Scotia. And what you some things. And I'm sure the warden, well, as brother and a few others. I wasn't very old, but I was meeting at the River School, 1977. It's one thing, there's lots of doors for folks could get out of another door and get away, or it would be a different door. But it could be the same way again. If it goes that way, but I like what I heard from you right there now. If we could do something with those particular things and leave the rest kind of open. Well, I know you gotta have 2.5 acres for property, and you gotta have a sewer that suits the area, and we've been doing that all along. But I'm thinking if we could do something on that scale, and that is our plan for the county, and that it's going to be an awful lot better for the county than somebody saying what you can do, what you can't do, because that's not going to work. I'll tell you right now. They'll have your marks. Anyway, I would, no problem for those 3 particular things, but once you get outside of that, it's a different story.
Thank you, Chester. I guess that wraps it up. I don't see no more. Go ahead, if it else is heard.
Yeah, just on this, and I know a lot of people are upset over planning these things like that, but most of my district is in a suburban area, next to that, and the village that's Solomon, guy. Okay, the Solomon laws there, selling fiber, things like that. People were upset. Right? So I can see this process eliminating stuff like that, but it'll be grandfathered in, still be there, because, like you said, it's grandfathered in. That. As long as council, when they went through amalgamation, you all agreed around the table, except one council, which was Councilor Over, to go through that process, but during that process, one councilors took sides. This is not something that we can take sides. This is something that we have to be forced to be to do. This is regulated by the commission, they're coming out and telling us we have to have a new plan. It's not these guys that are going to come up with a plan. It's us, it's the citizens in our areas that will come up with a plan. So, and I know these meetings can get hot, tested and all that. And I say, you have the plan, chairman of the plan advisory committee. So when we go up to the public meetings, people are upset with what's taking place without really knowing what's taking place. Councilors in that area is going to step up and say, listen, what has to be said here tonight? Come up with your suggestions how you want your community to look like. And I can see it. I can see the suburban area have a plan. As we get out, then it's more rural and then pretty well open, right? But we talk about agriculture. You want somebody to come in, make a subdivision of all the farmlands. There, the farm that farms the land, that they come in, they just can't get that land back, right? So, and I agree, if you have family, yeah, sure, that family should be able to build on it, things like that, but you get 200 acres, somebody buys them and put in something really want. This planning process, it's needed, but it's going to be highly sensitive to the communities, things like that, so. All I'm saying is, if you're in a meeting, councilors, as you get heated, step up and say something. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy. So now I understand there's a second version.
Might finish the same.
Good. The first one was wonderful. Make this one just as good.
Oh. Ian, I wish you'd have bombed. So yeah, thank you everyone for being here tonight, and I am going to be leading the engagement part of this. So as I've already heard, I got my work cut out for me. But I'm really looking forward to it because this is an opportunity for us to talk to people and to show them how planning is something that actually can work for them. These are tools at their disposal.
And this is not us coming in and telling people what tools we think they should be using. This is you telling us what tools you think we should be using here. So we're really looking forward to this opportunity. And I think, you've already raised a lot of amazing points about how we need to approach this conversation within the community, and we need to tread lightly. So really what I'd like to do is just to actually have a little bit more discussion. I'm going to be developing an engagement strategy. So the engagement strategy will really, if you go to the next slide, please. So really it hopes to give us a bit of a roadmap for how we want to approach the engagement. And it helps us to kind of set some goals about, what we want to achieve through this process and the steps we're going to take to get there. It also gives a bit more of a rationale behind the approach that we're going to take. And it serves as a reference document for all of us throughout the entirety of the project so that we've got something to look at that says, what's coming up next for engagement? How are we going to, how are we going to roll through these activities and what's happening when, what are the key dates? What are the roles and responsibilities between our team and the team at the municipality? And also gives a bit of a picture around the promotional plan as well. So you're all the experts in your community and I don't pretend to know. So every time I start this process, I really need to kind of talk to folks in the community about what the best way is to communicate with residents in Pictou County. So for instance, we did some work in Richmond County recently and I learned that the parish newsletter is the way to go. So you want people to know about something, it's the parish newsletter. So these are the kinds of things that I really want to know. To know how to reach people in the community. So that we're really tailoring this approach and we're not just taking a kind of one size fits all. We want to know what the best ways to really reach people are. Next slide, please. So like I said, I kind of want to have a little bit more conversation tonight. And we've gotten some ideas that come out from our previous discussion when at the end of Ian's presentation. But I'd love kind of the opportunity for us to just dive a little deeper into some of these questions. So with this process, some of the questions I always like to ask at the outset is, what does this engagement need to achieve? So both with the plan itself and with the public. So kind of the starting point for our conversation here, we've already heard that this process, we need to get public buy-in on this project. We need to change the tide on how people think about planning and get people to realize that this is something that, is a tool for them to use. Are there any other things that you think we really need to achieve through this planning process? Both with the plan and, with the messaging with the public that we haven't gotten so far?
Just a couple of things that when you have these public meetings, in fact, you do them, but one of the first things to mention is about the grandfather. We're not out to put somebody out of where they've had a farm or whatever else, and they've got a house built up around them, people would rather not be there. And in my area, I have a junkyard, you could call it, but it's also a mechanic business. And we try to enforce a lot of things there to protect the people around them. And the young man has lived up to most of those, but some of the neighbors just want none of it. The bottom line is, unless he's gone, they're not going to be happy. So some of those people are really expect that this process is going to look after the front one. That we're going to put something in place that's going to get rid of this farmer or this mechanic or this whatever. So I put that right up front, maybe before we ever had a meeting, so people aren't coming there thinking, this is my chance to get rid of so-and-so. But in terms of we don't have a lot of various newspapers, I don't believe, in areas I don't know of, but people chat a lot, I know, not myself, but online or whatever, but you're reaching a certain segment of our population, you miss the rest. So it's probably a mixed bag, but most businesses I know majority don't advertise the newspapers anymore because it's too expensive and they're not getting to very much of their population anymore. And, so, you know, the traditional ways of advertising meetings kind of gone out the door. A lot of people do it online somehow, then they miss a bunch. Flyers and mailboxes, which we're not allowed to do anymore. So it's pretty hard to get to all the people, other than having community meetings. You know, trying to advertise the best you can, but local community meetings, I still think are the best way to bring people together. But in order to prevent them from being a protest meeting, when you get there and there's people marching up down the road, you have to sort of set the tone ahead of time. Some of the stuff you folks are talking about tonight can do it our way. This is not to impose on anybody. This is finding what you want it to be. We have to do it. To tone that, but you know, we don't have to do it a certain way. We can choose the way. That tone needs to be set first, or else you're going to fill the hall. People say we got to stop these people right now, you know, before they get carried away. So setting the tone and then having community meetings, I think whether it's in the West Branch Hall or Lismore Hall or Chester's Way, and all through the whole area.
I imagine all of the above.
Yeah, and you're probably talking, you know, quite a few homes. Each one of us has a district, as Andy said, his is spread probably the widest, but you know, we all have a district that has two ends on it, or two ends in the center. And sometimes it's very different. You know, where people live, but I think smaller community meetings are the best, and to set the tone ahead of time so that you're not into a protest meeting.
Absolutely, those are great points.
Thanks, Robert. Randy, you have a question? Just on that, Tim. What the Lord was saying, we do have our municipal newsletter, so if we had things planned out, we could do a special edition and send that out, fix that, but you know, on this. In some districts are a lot larger than mine, mine's kind of compact, but if we had district meetings or just a district, like, I don't think that we should. I think you should have to be from that district in order to attend that meeting. Because if not, you get a bunch of people protesting something that's not even related to them, their area. So we can ask that. I don't live from the county, but we're doing the planning process for District 10. We're not doing the planning process for District 12, right? So if we could advertise it, and I'm not sure if we can or not, that it's for residents of District 10. And like Andy's area is spread out, so you might have to have a couple meetings there. But in my area, you can have one. And advertise it just for that, so that you have people talking about the area that you're in, not somewhere in the west, somewhere in the east. So.
I think you touch on an interesting point there in the fact that, you know, this isn't a broad strokes approach either. Like, we have to be context specific. So, you know, different communities might have different needs and, you know, wants within their areas. And so doing this kind of localized approach, I think, is going to be really important. I do know that sometimes in other engagements that we have done, we've had people who maybe live on a boundary and the other meeting is really far in the other direction, like for their area. And so they do come to the one closer. And, you know, I do think a lot of our presentation, especially in the initial phase of consultation, is really just going to be about this public education piece and this, you know, trying to kind of set the tone for this whole process. And so that presentation will be quite similar. Once we get into the draft engagements, where we have draft documents in front of us that people are able to really kind of engage with and speak to, there may be more of a need for kind of very, you know, localized meetings. That would be my suggestion at least.
It's not that. And just on that, I agree. During the evaluation study, things like that, we had protesters, same protesters every meeting. And they took over the meetings basically. Like it was, so it's something that you have to try to control.
And I'm not sure how you go about that, but, you know, you want to have the process so that people, everybody gets to speak, not just one, so.
Absolutely.
Hey, Logan had a comment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilor Palmer, a couple of your notes came up during the initial engagement and different phone calls and correspondence that we had following the enactment of this project. Some residents asked that there be opportunities to have larger group discussions as well and get everybody in a group to talk about more holistic, broader themes. But then on the flip side, just like you mentioned, there was support as well for the local meetings. So, and that could be for reasons including, you know, accessibility, you know, people just being able to attend their own meetings close to their communities, so they pick up the kids, you know, things like that too. So, I definitely, and I think it was touched on in the Upland proposal as well. We forget the exact number. I think it was something in the range of 12 overall meetings, and we looked at 12 overall districts, and we talked about the possibility of twinning them up a little bit. We talked about plan meetings early in the initial phase, and then at the draft documents phase as well, so that maybe every district ultimately gets, hopefully every district does get hit with individual meetings, and then some overall, I think you call it like event meetings, that kind of thing, whether it's set up during a key event or something going on in the community that could draw foot traffic in from, you know, it could be during it could be the big curling pinties or whatever, you know, we could be outside with a planning tent or something like that. But those were just items that were mentioned, and we had forwarded to Upland as well and chatted about them. So I think as Brian mentioned, sort of multi-pronged approach for a large group and find as well.
Yeah, with any planning process, with the engagement, we want to have opportunities for people to come and share their comments with their voice and their face, you know, in a room. But we also need to have, you know, not everyone's going to do that. Not everyone's going to stand up in front of a room and share their opinion, especially if it maybe is not a popular opinion in the room. And so we need to also have opportunities for people to be able to share their feedback privately and anonymously. So all of our approaches with our projects kind of take that full spectrum into account and ensure that there are multiple ways for people to participate in this process. And also, you know, in-person engagements, but also, you know, for folks who are more, you know, content online to leave comments on a map or take a quick survey, you know, those options will be available to them as well.
Okay, thank you. Get to council questions. Councilor Keenan first.
Thank you very much, Deputy Warden. I think it's important to have smaller meetings. I know in District 3 that we never hold meetings. We are always left to travel, whether we go to River John or we go to Scottsburg. Those are the communities that we identify with. We could see those as neighboring communities. So I think it would be very important to go see each district, because I think each district around the table here has something that's very unique, and it has different differences as compared to the next, and we'll have important different discussions. And I think it's important that we have a good education beforehand, so people can understand what these meetings are about, and try to give out as much information so we don't seem secretive. You know, people there's going to be opposition. There's always opposition. Any big important issue, there's always opposition, and people are allowed to have that opinion, and they're allowed to come protest that opinion, and they can go to every meeting if they want. They can feel however. That's how we live in a democracy. So I think that we should be, no matter what issue we had, I think that there's going to be an issue for that. There's going to be kind of a protest. But I think it's important that we let everyone's voices be heard, whether it's the majority opinion or not. And I'm really pleased to hear you say that, you know, someone might not feel, you know, want to get up on a mic and if it's in a big room and give an opinion, they don't think that they don't want to get booed by the crowd or, yeah, however. they might feel, but I think it's important for everybody's voice to be heard, whether, no matter quote unquote which side they're on. I think all voices are legitimate as residents. So, I would caution that not to play one side or the other, just to kind of make it as fair, open discussion as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Councilor Boyce.
If you, I just get a couple of, I don't think. Councilor Palmer was saying there, we'll maybe having, district meetings and talk to them. Would that result in, or could it result in different, bylaws or different, requirements for each district? But, okay, say that you turn around and we'll just use, we use the fences for instance, just around and it affects us in certain spots in the district 10, but then in district, 9, don't matter if that's for the one. Is there something that could come out of something like that?
Let you speak to that again.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, it's not common to see planning rules on a district by district basis, but you could, if it really came down that each district like had very different needs, you could if you needed to, but I don't think I've seen that specifically in Nova Scotia, just because very often, the issues tend to be, yes, individual districts have their issues, but they tend to be more the rural areas of each district tend to have shared issues. It's more of a type of community where you see the issues differ. So often it's more different between, you got different rules for the serviced areas than you do for the rural areas. And that might line up with districts just where the lines are drawn, but not because of that they're separate districts. That makes sense.
But I'm the same thing, we had meetings for recreation, we had meetings for different. You didn't get that many people, sometimes 2 people, so 2 people could talk for a whole community, like maybe District 10, you might build a house. Make it, another district where nobody shows up or 4 or 5 show up, you know what I mean? And you can't get a true picture. And I find that most people in Pictou County, and this is something you're gonna find, won't say too much, until it affects them. And then look out, the gas is gonna fall, and guess who's gonna get it? Us, absolutely, right?
Thanks, Peter. Councilor Thompson.
I'm gonna need 3 meetings in my district. Okay, just the way my district is split up. So have them just, I can't imagine just having 1 meeting in my district, so there's very distinct areas. I'm not here to tell you how this all goes about, that's why we hired you, okay? And it's a process, we have to let the process happen, so. All the best.
Thanks, Andy. Councilor Buck.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think that certainly setting the stage is important, and you're well versed in how to do that. I think that when we have district meetings, that I like the idea that Randy put forward, that it's for the district. We saw through the amalgamation issue where people were carrying out all of these meetings and dominating, certainly influencing the course of the conversation. So I think that it's important that perhaps in the education that we promote for the meeting is for people in that district, those are the people we wish to hear from. And everyone, if we have meetings all over the county, they're all going to have a chance to speak in their own area. And perhaps at the second level, we might change the rules a bit. But initially, if we want to hear from the citizens, I think they should have the opportunity to be heard. And I really think that the issue with is strong enough that we are going to have good numbers of people attending.
How we doing?
Great.
Oh, yes.
As an engagement manager, it's a good engagement. You're engaged. I'm pleased. So if I can get the next slide, please. Just a couple more kind of questions that I have for you folks tonight. So one of the things when we're approaching an engagement is to think about the population in terms of target audiences. So it's useful to kind of think of the population of Pictou County because we can't think of everyone, we can't reach everyone in the same way. Who might we be able to kind of consider as target populations, target audiences in the community? Because the way that we reach, youth is sometimes not the same way that we reach seniors. It's not the same way that we reach young families. And so I'm just curious from your perspective, if there are any kind of distinct target audiences that we need to consider. I heard the agricultural community in this discussion today is probably one specifically as well, because it's another group that has targeted needs. Like, you try to host an engagement with the agricultural community during the harvest season and you're not going to get a single person there. So you really need to have, those things thought out in advance and to make sure that your engagement activities are able to reach those target audiences. So I'm just curious from the room if there are any other kind of specific groups that you think we need to kind of consider as part of this engagement process.
Go ahead.
I just want to make one specific point that Pictou County Partnership, which is the local regional enterprise network, had asked to have some engagement specifically for the business community, so beyond just agriculture. But curious that as well.
I'm not sure what this would probably, but I do have the First Nations. Middle of my district, it's in me too. I'm not sure how involved First Nations could be involved, but again, I think they should be.
Yeah, 100%. So lately we've been treating the First Nations engagement as similar to the way that we do our abutting municipalities engagement. So we treat them as a separate, government entity and engage with them on a nation-to-nation basis. And so we would engage with them directly because sometimes First Nations communities own lands outside of the bounds of the reserve. And so, the process does also impact them. So absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we need to have young people involved. I don't know what the history is of you hosted on meetings before. Generally the people who turn up at the planning meeting, my mind is a more middle-aged to seniors are still very involved in planning. I think just because of their history, but younger people a lot of times say, "Oh, that doesn't affect me." That's going to affect you. Well, it's going to someday. May not now, but in 10 years' time, you go to want to start a small business, or you want to put a house here, or whatever. But how you get them interested and see that this does involve me. I think that's an area or groups that we need to, doesn't mean you have to have separate meetings, but you need to come up with ways to encourage them to come out to the committee meetings. And maybe they do at least, I don't know what your guys' history is with what the general turnout is like if somebody's showing up in other areas.
I think that's a really great point. And in some previous projects that we've done, we've also reached out to local high schools, and in some cases, it's a great opportunity, especially with our online. So we're going to have an online interactive mapping tool where people can drop pins on a map to kind of tell us about things that they really value about their community. And we've found in the past that this can be a really valuable tool for young folks. And so, it could be, we could reach out to high schools in some cases. There's a lot of different ways for us to kind of try to engage young people.
I'm liable to come to a meeting, but that way, If they can do it online, you're done, they're much more liable than the.
Yeah, you gotta make it easy for them.
Andy?
Just on, we have a stack full of plans kicking around. We have an active transportation plan, age-friendly plan, which is being updated, I think, next week. We have a myriad of plans. But a lot of those plans don't have keys. Will part of this process do that scan of what we have on file? And will it integrate some of those plans into this document?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, so as part of that kind of background analysis phase, we'll do a scan of what you have in terms of existing documents, review them, summarize them, just as an information point for people, because one of the things about planning, our type of planning activities, this is very often the most interaction people have with municipalities. So it's a good opportunity to like take the other aspects of what municipalities do, maybe as we're going out to these meetings. And yeah, if there are aspects of those plans that lead over into the world of land use and development planning, we can certainly help support them. If you have an active transportation plan, so man, we need bike parking everywhere. If we need to have a rule that businesses of a certain size provide bike parking, we can do that. So yeah, there are aspects, or to go back to that parkland dedication piece that Logan brought up, maybe in an open space plan, talks about where we want that. We can link that so that when subdivisions are giving us land, municipal open space land, that's going to line up with the great plan for where we actually want those lands.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. We have a very active 55 club around the county too, so that might be a good target.
Is that the New Horizons Club, or is that a separate club?
That's, I think there's
There's a few.
There's a number of them around the county. There are various state of activity, but even at the community center level, there's some very active community centers. They do the same type of work as a 55 plus club. We have 55 plus clubs that kind of picked up. They service the rural areas of this part of the county. And there's other ones. I think Scottsburg's got a very active senior 55 plus club. You would have, you should have an opportunity to talk to some of the trails groups. And if there's, I don't, that's that active transportation part, right? But there are a number of those small groups that you should have a conversation. Might have some good input as well.
Thank you. That actually raises it kind of gives me a nice segue in this process, because we have so we're talking about target audiences right now. So we're kind of talking about larger groups of people, but there's also going to be stakeholder engagement as part of this process as well. So as Logan mentioned, with the local enterprise network, with these 50 plus groups, and with other kind of community organizations. And so that's something that we're going to really look to you folks to help us to determine who are the groups that we really need to talk to in your areas. And so we will be in touch through the municipal staff to get your input on that stakeholder list, so that these groups are being informed of the process. In some cases, they can be great champions in helping us get the word out about engagement activities as well. But also, it's going to be you folks helping us to determine who those people are in the community that we really need to talk to. Okay, go ahead. Next slide, please. The next kind of thing I want to touch on is just through these kinds of processes, we want to ask questions to people. And really, it's at the end of the day, we only want to ask questions that we really need to know the answer to. Because sometimes when you ask a lot of questions, you set a lot of expectations for things that maybe you're not actually planning to address. And so it's important for us to have a picture in our mind of what kinds of questions we want to answer through this through this project. So the questions that I kind of have up here on the board right now, so what do we need to know about the communities of Pictou County? What are the key issues for residents, businesses, industries? And we've kind of had a bit of conversation around that tonight already. I think a big one is going to be really, especially the initial phases of consultation are about getting to people's priorities. What matters to people? What needs to be protected through this process? We need to know, also how to get people to engage with this process, which you've all been very helpful so far in helping to kind of determine different ways for us to do that. But I'm wondering if there are any other questions that you think we should be asking.
Lots of different things for lots of different people, but if I think of people who live in the rural area, their privacy, their property value are two big ones. Lifestyle privacy, we mix it all together. But they bought a place and their wind tower development policy or whatever came in behind for some people. So they moved up to a very, very rural part, Pictou County, nothing but rabbits and deer. And this is where I'm gonna live. It's a difficult place to get to in the winter time and all kinds of problems. So they want it to be a very private place, but suddenly wind towers show up. And they got, all the problems that came with that. There's no way to seeing them or having them in their backyard. So all of a sudden when they bought the property values, go down a lot. They say, well, I'm going to sell my house here next to the wind tower. What you can offer me? Your property value is down a lot, but also so is your privacy. And I think most people who live in rural areas, they don't mind having neighbors, but they don't want to have those neighbors suddenly ruin their privacy. They're going to have wild, musical things all night long before 4 o'clock in the morning. Suddenly their privacy is gone. And this isn't a business setting up. This is only going to summer for 3 or 4 nights, but still it takes away them enjoying the quiet, peaceful part of their property. Same thing with dogs park and all kinds of other things that we have other bylaws for and stuff, but it doesn't mean we can control it all. But if it becomes permanent, if it's a mill sets up next to you, or whatever it is, some of these horses are running loose all the time, and so much for nice plants and everything. So all your privacy is gone, but at the same time, your investment is gone. You can't even sell food to get away from this because it's not worth anything anymore. I know a little bit about the cannabis business, so there are going to be the day come, I think, where there's going to be people complaining about the smell of this stuff. Well, it can't be a user, maybe it smells pretty good, but if you don't, they need to stink. My brother who's not here tonight raised mink for a while. Anybody knows anything about mink? They're worse than the cannabis. So it's everything from smell, the noise, the dogs barking, all that. How much of that we can control under this, I don't know. But you ask what's important to people, and I think that's some of them anyway, or 2 of them is privacy, lifestyle with that, and property values. So how much of that works into this, or can work into this? You can certainly lose both of those in a hurry if the wrong people move in next to you. How much we can control who those wrong people are is another question.
Yeah, those are excellent points, and kind of touch on that. Often through these processes, we think of, what do we want our communities to look like? But sometimes an equally valid question is, what do we not want our communities to look like? And ultimately, at the end of the day, a lot of people want to come home in 10 years and recognize their home. And that's something that planning can help us do. So I think you've raised a lot of really good points there around, again, the way in which we frame this process to people, in that it actually has the potential to better protect their freedoms on their properties. as opposed to as it currently stands, where there's no control over what moves in next to you. You know, could be somebody moves up here and decides to build a racetrack next to your farm, and what impact would that have, you know? And you've got no recourse. And so helping people to really see that, I think, is important. Okay, next slide, please. So this one's kind of more so speaking to our roles as a project team. So whenever we undertake a project like this, we really do see all of you as a part of, you're really a big part of the project team here. And so we're going to be working together to reach the people in the community. And it's really important for us to have clear communication about who's responsible for what aspects of the project. And that's going to be a big part of this engagement strategy, is determining kind of, you know, obviously it's my job to create all the content and for promotional materials and deliver the engagement program. But I'm going to want to vet a lot of these things through you folks to make sure that we're taking the right approach. And so the engagement strategy, when it is completed, we'll want to circulate it and get your comments on that. But ultimately, you know, we need your help to get the word out about this and to kind of help be champions of this project, because ultimately what we've seen is that the best success that we've had is through having engaged staff and elected officials. Those are the best outcomes we've had, are when people are committed to, you know, the process and trying to get this right. You know, it's not always going to be a comfortable process, and that's okay. And we're completely, you know, we're ready for that. We do this all the time. But at the end of the day, we really want this to be the best possible plan and land use bylaw for Pictou County. And we want residents to see themselves reflected in it. And so, you know, it's going to be up to all of us, I think, to help make that happen. So really appreciate everyone's kind of commitment to that we've expressed on the room here tonight. It's, yeah, really helpful. Do you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to come in on that and say that, you know, as a council, two of the biggest things that you can help with in this process are you know your community, you know who to talk to and how to get the word out, and you know helping spread the word about the project. But also by, you know, one of the biggest things you can do is being defenders of the process. And you don't necessarily need to defend us and our work or anything like that, but being a voice of support in the community for going through this is really, really big. I'm just wrapping up a project in Ganesh, in the unplanned areas there in Ganesh County, and they have very similar problems with planning that had been tried in the past, failed, animosity about it, and their area councillor, well, he doesn't necessarily agree too much with planning or having heavy-handed rules. He was able to stand up and say, we got to do this, and we're going to make a plan that's going to work for you. Let's go down that path together. And that went a long way to bring people at least into the fold in terms of talking. You know, and we're gonna get the protests. We're gonna get the people who disagree, and we're good at dealing with that.
We don't fight.
We don't fight. We're good at dealing with it, but having that, I guess, figurehead as the area councillor saying that that people can look to and say, okay, if they're at least participating in this, there's something to it, is really, really big for us.
Please don't give us any surprises. What we don't need is to hear that at a meeting last night, you know, it was proposed they're gonna do this or they're gonna do that. We as councillors need to hear anything like that first, so that we're prepared for it. You know, and I'm sure we will, but otherwise you get a call from somebody some morning, say, well, I was at a meeting last night in whatever community, and they said that this is gonna happen or that's gonna happen. It might not even be true. might just be what somebody interpreted, but, that, like I said, please don't give us any surprises.
Mr. Chair, maybe I will comment on that is two things is one thing that we'll emphasize and that I encourage you to emphasize for all of this is like draft. And it's draft until the day that you vote on it. And even then, plans change. We want to make sure that the message gets out to people that this is about evolving the documents that, when people hear things, it's not set in stone. And we want people to react to things and we'll change paths if we need to. The other piece is that, that big work plan that we had throughout that process, we're going to be back here with council, before there's a draft that goes out to the public. We'll take what we hear in that initial engagement, we'll put together a draft of what we think we heard, but then that will come to you. And we'll give you an overview of that, so you can check us and say, that's gonna be a problem, or, before that. Never will we, Upland, be out there proposing something as let's do this.
Unless you say so. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was stakeholders, but I do feel like you kind of touched on that earlier when we talked about the target audiences. So we can go to the next slide, and we're coming to the end, I promise. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is we built in some flexibility into our engagement, into our proposal with the engagement. We call these creative engagements because really they need to be tailored to the community. But one of the things that we've had great success with is pop-up events. And so I heard earlier, Logan was talking about a curling event of some kind or something like that. So these are great opportunities for us to just set up and just talk to people like, on a very, casual conversation. And it's a way to reach people who are not going to go to a public meeting. Sometimes in some places, especially in rural communities, I'll just go hang out at the grocery store for like 2-3 hours and just talk to passersby and just let them know that the project is happening, have some really simple questions to engage in some dialogue with folks. But it can be a really good way to just reach people that might not otherwise typically participate. So that's one kind of creative engagement that we've used many times over. And we do find that some of the best engagement comes from like piggybacking off of existing events. So sometimes it's if there's a farmer's market, we set at the table at the farmer's market, just provide information.
I was gonna say the farmer's market, people are usually.
Those are my people, farmer's market people are my people.
There's a big crowd there.
Yeah.
They won't all be from our municipality, but there's a big crowd.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great place for talking to people.
Pay for your table.
Pardon me? Sure thing. Just like we'll pay for all the community halls and, we gotta support the locals.
East Spectrum Rural Fair, I think, is on this year, and it's rumored to on the festival days, but the east and west look like the good opportunity. Just the.
Yeah.
Started got a question.
Thank you, Deputy Gordon. It's more of a comment. I think that's great that you're engaging, but I think you have to be very careful that you're not trying to quote unquote sell it to people. I think that that's a very fine line that you're gonna have to walk. It's great to be engaged, but at some point people are gonna feel there again, selling their, selling their stuff, trying to get everybody to agree with them, you know what I mean? So I'm just saying, I can see that mindset. So I would just caution you on that.
Total line.
Yeah. Well, no, I just wouldn't say, don't be everywhere.
Right. 100%.
Don't be everywhere, don't be in anything, because then people feel like you're trying to sell them something.
Right.
And I feel that oversaturation is not a good thing.
Yes, and we
In my
do,
opinion.
and we do have a budget, so. There will only be so many. So that's one opportunity is to, maybe it's we pick 1 or 2 events, and it's less of us trying to get people to come talk to us and more of a let people come to you. Maybe that's the right approach. But again, we can seek your local advice on those things. We've also done things like postcards in the past where we've just printed a simple postcard with a question around, you know, what's your vision for your community for the future, or what are, you know, in one sentence, how would you describe your community? Just to try to start getting a picture from people, but really getting at what their values are, what it is they really value about the community. And then there's other opportunities as well, like in the past, we've done things like photo voice projects where we get people to submit photos of the things that they love about their communities. And again, it just helps us to glean what people really care about and value. So those are some possibilities for creative engagements. Are there any other, you know, ways that you've seen engagements done in Victor County in the past that have worked really well? Or something that you think people would really gravitate towards that we haven't discussed?
It was mentioned earlier that we have a newsletter that comes out quarterly. We have a communications officer. So there are questions and information that certainly can be shared in the newsletter. And I think that's going to be a valuable way to help educate people on the topic.
Thanks, John. Logan?
The event that we have coming up, that this municipality is taking part in, is the Victor County Climate Summit, which is taking place in partnership with each of the different municipalities. Being hosted June 8th or 9th, whatever the Saturday is, at Victor County Wellness Center. I believe they're still looking for those presenters or not necessarily panelists, but people there. So I think maybe following this meeting, if we can chat about things like that, that should be helpful as well. So if we can line up the call, that makes it easier.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yes, Andy?
I don't know if this would be helpful or not, but have you ever traveled through some of these communities with the local councilors? Drive-throughs? That's something you do, or is there any utility to that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. So usually what we do at the start of the project, so kind of in the next month or so in this timeline, is to do like detailed tour of the municipality. And usually that's with a staff member or a councilor, whoever, be like, yeah, there's that issue that people always have, or this is the great community that people love, or there's that hall that we might go to. We've usually done it with staff members, but it's not to say we couldn't frame it that way where we, and council, we wanted to show us their district, or coordinate that.
So if you do that, and schedule District 10 from like 8 o'clock in the morning to 8:30, and then I'll hit you for the rest of the day. Okay?
Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, final slide, next one, please. So just next steps from here. So thank you for all the input tonight. I'm going to take what I learned and put everything into a draft engagement strategy, which will detail the target audiences, the activities, how we plan on promoting and reaching all of these target communities as well. And we'll also get the stakeholder list started and circulated to start getting people's perspectives on potential stakeholders in the community. Once we have a draft of that, we'll circulate that for review and ask for any comments that you can have. And then we'll finalize it and we'll get to work. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me. Thank you.
You review what you said at first. Checking memory here. On the public meetings, like you said, I know Darrell mentioned not to have them in summer, but when do you see us having a public meeting to run?
Yeah, through you, Chair, looking back at the schedule, the public, so we had engaged, a whole engagement period in our proposal kind of starting in July, but that included like, that period includes like, gather all the materials, booking halls and stuff like that. Stakeholder discussions, but it looks like the meetings, like actually doing community meetings, we can schedule more for like tail end of September into October.
Oh, it's good.
Yes.
Okay, so I didn't hear that clearly.
Oh, yes, generally, I treat the summer as an engagement blackout period. And I feel like everyone needs a bit of a blackout period, you know, we need a period where we're not being asked to engage all the time, we'll need a break.
That's what.
I think the thought that we give them the cottages, because I know I have a large amount of cottages in my area, who would only be there between July and September, so we have to find a way to make sure we contact, because they do come from areas, a lot of them that have zoning, and they can either be problematic for us, or they can really help us to work through some of the concerns that we'll have with them.
Yeah, that's a very good point, something I think we're gonna have to give some consideration to, so as a target audience, being seasonal residents. That will give me some food for thought for how we're gonna reach that community, because I'm not sure how your newsletter goes out, if it goes out to every resident, like every address.
Right.
Yes, to early communications.
But that's, it's paying tax bill.
Anyone who has a tax bill. So would it go to seasonal, it would go to seasonal residents as well?
They have an R. Is it a civic number, yeah. Yeah. I know I sent some to the Yellowknife and stuff, so yes. So,
Yeah, still spoken there.
yeah,
Their home address.
yeah, whatever goes on your tax bill.
Okay.
I think when they first come in the season, they usually get their like, waste schedule. So that may be something too, where they, you know, they get their recycling schedule, or when the truck's coming down the lane for all that, so that might be another.
Okay.
But I agree with Debbie, there has to be some kind of.
If I could, just for a second, the next one's gonna go out probably late June at the latest. So if any meeting possible, and that newsletter, that would be
Early, we got some early scheduling to do.
yes, yeah.
Even a blurb within that. Would be useful.
We'll give that one some thought, and I'll detail the approach and the strategy. Thank you though for that consideration.
The presentation tonight, we'll have a copy of it, because we want to make sure that Council Parker gets the look at that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's everything.
You better all get one, I can see a thing on that, and glasses on.
Okay, yeah, no, everybody will.
We'll make sure.
Okay, then Ian and Ryan, thank you very much for making a great presentation. I think we're on the right step, the right people. And I think you can trust all the councils around this table. This is something we've got to do. It's still in force. We want to do it right. So I think we can give you our word that we'll work with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Meetings adjourned.
It's over, thank you.